Well, hello and welcome to Beaverdale Books. It's great to see you all here to share tonight's book talk. But before we begin, I have to mention a couple of upcoming events. So tomorrow night, August 8th at 7 p.m., we're going to have open mic poetry night. And that'll be with MC Kelsey Bigelow. If you like poetry, if you write poetry, if you read poetry, or if you just want to listen to poetry, it is a wonderful evening, and it's all free, and we never know who's going to show up. We usually have 10 or 12 poets that share their works, and it's always fun. And then if you're a romance lover, you want to stop in on Saturday for local romance day, and then on Sunday, check out the Brick Book Bash. I had to practice that one. And the organization called Artful, they'll be here Sunday they will provide all the supplies. There is a registration fee, and you can decorate a brick to look like your favorite book. We also have a book launch on Tuesday, August 12th at 6:30. Local writer Stephanie Caffrey is going to be here for her new book, Decoding the Heart. And you can find all the details on our website, or you can pick up a flyer like this one at the register, or you can sign up for our newsletter to keep up on all of our events. All right, now on to tonight's program. In Learning in Freefall, Nicole Terrizzi traces her journey from rural Iowa to an urban Kansas City classroom, offering a candid look at the broken systems meant to empower students, while also sharing her mental health journey, counseling, high-dosage antidepressants, and ultimately electroconvulsive therapy. With raw honesty, Terrizzi explores what it means to learn while you teach, sharing insight to the often hidden emotional toll of the profession. Her memoir is essential reading for anyone interested in education, mental health, or the intersection of both. Nicole has devoted her life to equity in opportunity. She began her career as a teacher and has spent more than 15 years collaborating with local, national, and international organizations. Working as a fundraiser, consultant and board member for nonprofits, corporations, and foundations. Nicole is passionate about ensuring everyone has access to the resources and opportunities necessary to thrive. She is originally from a small farming community in Iowa and currently resides in the Pacific Northwest with her family. And her hobbies include traveling solo, visiting parks, and hiking with her partner, 2 young children and dog, and reading creative nonfiction whenever she can. Please join me in welcoming Nicole Terrizzi.
First and foremost, thank you guys all for being here. It feels a bit surreal to be at this point. I've spent 10 years on the vision of this book, in the last 4 years and 5 years in earnest making it happen. And I did a lot of connecting with people to help make this come to reality. I had joined writers groups in San Francisco, had one friend that I made from those accountability writers groups where we literally met every week for 2.5 years to touch base on, did you do your writing this week or didn't you? Somewhere along the line, somebody told me about the importance of a writer's community. And at the time, I didn't really know what that meant. And I definitively know what that means at this point, including all of you, the supporters that are here, the connections that people made for me, from the typesetting of the book to the cover page creation, or to the actual book itself. All of those individuals, all of you, are supporters that helped make that happen. But even as I first tried to traditionally publish this book, the agents and the publishers who offered their wisdom, incredibly grateful. I wanted to start by kind of talking a little bit about the writing process. A lot of you, I'm grateful, are from Simpson, and I was an English and journalism major at Simpson, so I did a lot of writing in school, and writing came really naturally to me. I wrote weekly feature articles in a few different newspapers after college, the Des Moines Juice and the Kansas City Ink, those feature newspapers. And it was very different for me, though, to start writing about my own life. And I was not comfortable in doing it at all. So much so that I felt like I had to take some classes to build my confidence in order to do so. I had some leftover money from Teach for America, the AmeriCorps money, ironically, and I ended up taking a couple classes from UCLA online, and then subsequently joined the San Francisco Writers Grotto, a number of other communities that were offered that support as I was writing, especially during COVID, and I'm grateful for everyone that I met along on the journey. Cheryl Strayed, the author of Wild, that Reese Witherspoon movie, wrote, "I love writing, I really do, even though I often hate it at various points in the process. Learning to accept that has been so important to me." There were lots of starts and stops on this journey. There were lots of, with this being such an emotional book, there were cathartic releases, and then there were times where I literally just sat on it because I couldn't touch it anymore. And honestly, like, there were parts that I was like done and it was ready for the next step and I couldn't touch it because I was scared to put it out in the world because it's so vulnerable. There were points in this process I really did hate writing. But the commitment meant for months at a time, I was working on this book for 2 to 3 hours a night, Sunday through Thursday. I would take Fridays and Saturdays off. I had an amazing partner that would watch 2 of those children over there, or one of them at one point, where he would literally, my daughter at the time, who's now 7, was 2, and she wouldn't allow me to write if I was inside the house. And so my husband would make dinner and set it out on the back porch, and I would eat dinner in the shed in the backyard, and then I would write for 2 to 3 hours, Monday through Thursday. And what made me do it, though, too, is the fact that I wasn't inside eating dinner with my family, and I wasn't inside helping with the put down for bedtime. It forced me to write, and because I wasn't going to be wasting that time sitting in what else is there to do in the backyard shed? So I did the writing. I also committed to writers' retreats throughout. I would go to, there's a cabin in Cazadero, California, where I would go, and I at one point formed a relationship with this woman, didn't need to Airbnb it anymore. I would just message her and say, "Hey, can I steal your cabin for a couple days?" It was in the absolute middle of nowhere. I swear, like, if you heard a dog bark, it echoed in the trees around, but it was absolutely beautiful. And those were the times that I actually worked through some of the toughest things, and I wrote about the toughest things, because it's one thing to sit in the shed in your backyard and write about Iowa. I know that wasn't as difficult, but writing about those really difficult times, I almost had to get myself in a certain mindset that I didn't want to be around other people in doing so. I mentioned that really supportive partner, and because of that, I was committed to making the most of the time. If I was spending it away from him and my daughter and my son, I was going to make sure that I was writing. Wanted to talk a little bit about the developmental edit. And this is the big changes, where I trusted this baby that I had spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours with, and gave it to somebody and had them potentially tear it apart. And that was also very terrifying. And then, not to mention, give them thousands of dollars to have them tear it apart. And so, it was really scary as well. And I was lucky that I found somebody. It was difficult to find somebody to trust. And I found somebody through a website, honestly, but I knew she was the right person because when I messaged her and told her the synopsis, and you literally were pitching to different editors. So I pitched my story, said hey, here it is, this is where I am. And she said, I was intrigued from the beginning because I'm also from Iowa. But as soon as you told me that the story was about mental health, you had me. I will do whatever I can to help you. And she was my #1 choice, and she happened to be an editor for 2 of the big 5 publishers. So I knew that I trusted her with the work that I was putting in front of her. And when she gave it back to me, everything she said made it that much better. And so that felt incredible. there are more stories like this about those connections, recommendations that were serendipitous for my copy and line editor, my proofreader, all of the things I had no idea that went into this. My book coach, who provided so much guidance and project management to help me make it happen. She was a friend of a friend, and she put together a timeline and said, you need to do these things, and I will meet with you bi-weekly to make sure you get them done. And so one of the reasons I chose to self-publish, I had a few hot leads where like I had conversations with agents, and then I actually a couple times was able to talk to publishers themselves. But what I kept coming up against is, one, I'm a white woman writing about race, which is a difficult time and place for me to do that. I'm also not famous, and so a memoir not coming from a famous person is a tough sell in and of itself. And then the other one that was disheartening to me is I was told again and again, nobody wants to read about mental health. And that's the one I struggled with the most, honestly, as far as like, there's so many people that have those struggles that don't talk about them. And that's one of the key drivers of why I wanted to write about it. I mentioned there were lots of stops and starts. They all largely stemmed from fear. But here I am, and here we are. And thank you for being here. I wanted to give a little context. I am going to do 2 short readings from the book. I've navigated mental health challenges for the majority of my life, namely anxiety and depression, when I was formally diagnosed in 3rd grade. And as I've grown older, I've become more open about my experiences. But this book pulls the curtain back on it all. And the teaching environment in what was considered a failing school in Kansas City was honestly a worse nightmare for me, as far as like the lack of control, the poverty, the violence. Growing up, I had a lowercase t trauma type thing, but bringing all of those, teaching in an environment in which I did brought all of those things to the forefront, and forced me to cope in ways that I'd never done before. So I knew in my final days of teaching in Kansas City that this was a story I would write about, but I didn't know necessarily that I would do anything with it. And I had written about the experiences daily in a journal, and so I pulled a lot from that as I wrote this book as well. In addition to shining light on the systemic oppressions still alive and well today in our education system, 15 years later, I personally felt the need to tell my story because of the stigma around sharing about mental health. And I think that looking at my social media highlight of life, that oftentimes you saw a certain person in high school, you saw a certain person in college, and pulling back the curtain on my life and bearing it all, if it helps one person, I set out for what I meant to do. For my reading, I wanted to give a little bit of context. Those of you that have read it already, which I think many of you have, you know it's a pretty heavy story, but the book starts in a really heavy place with a focus on one student named Samuel. And I had real concerns about him in my 2nd grade class. He had been struggling socially and emotionally, vocalizing that he wanted to kill himself as a 2nd grade student, and had threatened violence and had wrapped a jump rope around his neck, and I'd been trying to do everything I could to help him, but nobody was really taking me seriously. The passage I'm going to read is coming off a pretty horrific incident, where his mother had come into the classroom and whipped him with a belt. And Shantice is his student's mother, and Mr. Robertson is the class aide, and Miss King is the principal, and this is a pretty pivotal moment in this story. After pulling into the empty school parking lot that Wednesday morning, avoiding the potholes as best I could, I turned off the ignition and just sat for a few moments, taking a deep breath before opening the door and heading toward my classroom. I used my key to open the heavy blue door and held it open for my friend Rachel, who had just pulled into the lot shortly after me. Rachel taught 8th grade science, and her year hadn't started off smoothly either. Although her classroom was downstairs, she followed me upstairs to mine to talk. "How you doing?" she asked as we walked. I'm fine. I'm hanging in there, I guess. How about you?" "Same. Any news on that student and his mom?" "No, well, not really. Miss King says she didn't think the mom was abusive, but..." "Are you kidding me?" Rachel interrupted me. "Yeah, so don't share this, please, but I ended up making the call to CPS. We're mandated reporters." "Wow, that's heavy." I could hear the sympathy in Rachel's voice. At least she gets it, I thought. Yeah, I'm pretty anxious about the mom knowing it was me, I admitted. I'm sure you'll be fine. There's no way she could really know it was you. You're not the only one who knew about it. A kid in the class could even have told their parents. I nodded. Thanks. You know, we should try to school together some days if our school or after school schedules align, I suggested. Our condos were only 2 doors down from one another. In fact, there were 6 TFA teachers in our complex, 3 of whom worked at Carver. Yeah, I'd totally be game. Let's chat, she said. Great. Well, have a good day. It's hump day, but who's counting days, right? I tried to force a chuckle. Rachel laughed and waved goodbye. As I walked into my classroom, I thought about how grateful I was that I'd found a friend at Carver. Then I unloaded my bag and started preparing for the day by writing the day's objectives on the board in chalk, double-checking that I had the correct books and materials ready and easily accessible, and pulling down the small chairs from the tops of desks and arranging them neatly. Destiny, one of my most vocal students, walked into the classroom and proclaimed her presence. Good morning, Miss C. She ran over and gave me a hug before putting her coat and bag inside the small movable coat closet that housed all the students' things. She then began helping me take the chairs down off the desks. Slowly, more students began to trickle in. I realized I had forgotten to track down Mr. Robertson, since I'd been more focused on my interaction with Rachel than a potential run-in with Shantice. Destiny, have you had breakfast yet? Can you make sure you head down with the others? I asked. Before she could respond, I saw her look to the doorway as Shantice barreled toward me with Samuel in tow. What gives you the right to talk to anyone about how I discipline my son? She shouted as her eyes shot daggers. By this point, her face was inches from mine and her hands were clenched as if she was ready to pounce. In a venomous voice, she hissed, You don't have anything to say? My heart was in my chest. I couldn't breathe, and I certainly couldn't speak. My students continued to enter our classroom, now quietly and curiously watching to see how this was going to play out. No longer holding back, Shantice yelled in my face, Who do you think you are? Shantice, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, said Mr. Robertson, who was suddenly at my side. Shantice turned to him. Do you even know what she did? She scoffed. This is not the time or place. I need you to go, he said, motioning to the door. Don't you touch me, Shantice said, looking at his hand as if it were on fire, and then looking at me through narrowed eyes. The kids were all watching with dumbfounded looks on their faces. I felt exactly as they looked. Miss Keene walked in the door as students walked by my room, conspicuously glancing in to see what the noise was about. What seems to be the trouble in here? Asked Miss King. Shantice was just leaving, Mr. Robertson explained, as Shantice brushed past Miss King without a word and walked out the door. Miss King looked to me for explanation, her eyes intense and expectant. I made a call to CPS to report what happened on Monday. I had to. I'm a mandatory reporter and I need to protect my students. She tisked her teeth at me and looked at the floor before looking me in the eyes. The shame was immediate, even though I was an adult being scolded by this elderly principal. I'm really disappointed in you. I had wanted her approval so badly, and now I didn't know what to think. My eyes welled with tears as I clenched my jaw, doing everything I could not to cry in front of Miss King, Mr. Robertson, and the students lingering in the classroom. You talk too much. You sure didn't need to share this with Mr. Robertson or anybody else. I didn't have a response for her. There was nothing to be said. Instead, I used all my energy I could muster to contain the sob that was building in the back of my throat. Miss King turned and walked out the door. You gonna be okay? Mr. Robertson asked, looking at me with sympathy, but also the fear of a young man who wasn't sure what to do with the girl of virgin tears in front of him. The tears finally welled over. Fine, I replied as I quickly wiped them away. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you. It wasn't anything. I'll try to stay close, but I really don't think you have anything to worry about moving forward. It's unlikely she'll be back. Truly, thanks again, Mr. Robertson. And then he turned and was gone, and I was left with the remaining students, many who had seen every moment of the critical event that had transpired in the previous 10 minutes. More students began to trickle in the door as we neared our start time. It felt as though any authority I had somehow maintained after the first incident with Shantice was gone. The day became another battle for my students, and for me, frankly. It had been my job to create a safe place for them, to ensure they had access to opportunities to learn and grow, and I had already failed. I called in sick the next day, and then again on Friday. I needed the time to figure out if I could go back. So pretty heavy place there. I stayed, and I'll read just another short section where I had worked with a friend that I had met serendipitously to create kind of a Christmas package of sorts with to send home with my students, and it blossomed into something much more. I had inadvertently met Andrea through a friend who recommended I do some self-care through massage therapy. Although I hadn't had many massages, I figured out quickly Andrea had a gift. In addition to the immense gratitude I had for her giving me a teacher discount, the hour I spent each month on her massage table was one where my anxiety and stress melted away. It was those monthly encounters that led to a somewhat unconventional friendship. I was in my early 20s and Andrea was middle-aged, but my old soul knew no boundaries. I had shared many stories about my Teach for America experience with her. Knowing many of my students went home each week with a backpack of food from the local nonprofit program, it was unlikely many of my students would have numerous presents under their respective trees. So she asked if she could do something about it. What would you think if I mobilized my friends to put together small gifts for your homeroom students? It could all be the same thing. I'll take donations, see how much we amass, and then I could get 32 of the same thing, and you can pass them out on the last day of school before holiday break. I don't think there's any reason to say no to that. And with that, Andrea was off to the races. The idea blew up more than either of us could have anticipated. Andrea recruited a few friends to join the initiative, who in turn easily convinced others to share the love. The donations were overwhelming, taking over our living rooms as we organized the gifts and determined recipients, which was clearly going to be more than my homeroom students. We ended up with gifts for all of the middle schoolers and kids in numerous other grades at Carver Elementary. There were school supplies and crafts materials, glue sticks, construction paper and coloring books, notebooks, pencils, erasers, post-it notes, more than 100 books, and even balls for the playground. There were food items, macaroni and cheese, trail mix and Teddy Grahams, bags of animal crackers and plastic containers of peaches, 400 granola bars, 300 bags of potato chips, more than 1,000 bags of fruit snacks, cans of chicken noodle soup, oatmeal, Oreos, Pop-Tarts, Apple Jacks, milk, fruit, pudding, and popcorn. There were more practical items like boxes of Kleenex and hand sanitizer, toothbrushes, fuzzy socks, soap, and more than 250 pairs of hats, gloves, and blankets for the cold winter. There were less practical but incredibly important fun items like sparkly nail polish, rings, perfumed lotion, and lip gloss, bouncy balls, frisbees, Hot Wheels, Star Wars, silly putty, and the crucial candy canes and chocolate Santas. And then, of course, there were the 32 backpacks that had spurred the idea. These were for my homeroom students, and we strategically filled each of them with 45 different items, including $10 in cash and $10 in McDonald's gift cards for each. It was more than we could have ever imagined. It felt amazing to pass out the gifts to classes throughout Carver and then to give the overflowing backpacks to kids in my homeroom. I wasn't going to let a chance for a short speech pass. I know we all have our ups and downs. That's to be expected. But if there's any point during this holiday break or even in the future that you're feeling low, I want you to think about this backpack and remind yourself that every single item in here came from someone who cares about you. These individuals care about you without ever even having met you, I said. I let the idea sink in with a few moments of silence. Now get out of here and have a great break. The room came alive with energy as some students pulled items out of the backpacks and examined their loot, while others took my advice and ran out the door with their bags, ready to start the 2 weeks of holiday vacation. Thank you, Miss C. Brexton came in to give me a hug. You're so welcome. This has little to do with me, but you made it happen. I only helped. This was a lot of other people who, like I said, care about you. Merry Christmas, Miss C, said Brexton. Merry Christmas, Brexton. The classroom continued to buzz with excitement as the few volunteers who had been part of the initiative had decided to join in the distribution watched in awe as students expressed their delight about their gifts. That was a great speech, Andrea said, leaning in for a hug. You made this happen, I said. We both did. I stood back to watch as some students squealed in delight and others looked quietly in awe as they pulled item after item out of their new backpacks. And just like that, my first semester of teaching middle school was over. Only one semester at Carver and I'd be done with my Teach for America experience. Little did I know, my biggest battle was left to fight. So I'll end reading there, and we'll open up if anyone has any questions. And if not, I can sign some books.
What do you think's been the most rewarding part of writing the book?
Honestly, like hearing from people. I've gotten a lot of messages from people, and it set out to do the thing that I wanted to do, is like impact. And honestly, like I left things pretty. I didn't tie anything up with a nice bow, and I did that on purpose. I was not the Freedom Writers lady. I didn't have like massive success in the classroom, but I think it's forced people to have some conversations, because this was 15 years ago, and so very little has changed, both with education as well as mental health. and the messages of support that I've gotten from people have been integral to even along the way to keep me going too, and telling me that this was the right thing to do.
Have you stayed in touch with any of the students?
I am in touch with a few students. There's one from that original second grade class. He is now a dancer in Atlanta. There's one middle school student that I'm still in touch with as well. And then I did end up going on and teaching another couple years in Oakland, California. And I was living in the Bay Area and ran into one of them on the street. And he's like, Miss C? And it was so fun. So I am still in contact with some of my students. And those Oakland students in particular had been told, like, the vision for me was to write a book and to be a published author. And so, like, they sent me off. I left the teaching profession and went to nonprofit, and they sent me off with this signed book where they all wrote me letters about the New York Times best-selling author. I'm not there yet, but I still have that too. And so, like, yeah, I still work in nonprofit. I'm a fundraiser, and so, like, my students are still always in the back of my mind.
Was teaching in Oakland any different than Kansas City?
Surprisingly, yes. I'll own, like, I taught at a charter school in Oakland, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, but often charter schools have access to a bit more resources. They do have fundraising arms, but it was really interesting. I still am connected with that old principal from Oakland, and I vividly remember I was still pretty shell-shocked from Kansas City, and she sat me down one time and she's like, Nicole, you're not in Kansas City anymore. Like, calm down type of thing. And so, like, it was a completely different student population too. I was teaching largely African American and Black students in Kansas City, and a very heavy Latino population in nonprofit largely since. I had a brief stint in ed tech, but I found a niche in writing, grant writing in particular, and building relationships. And so my job right now is I fundraise. I am responsible currently for raising $40 million for an organization. So no pressure there. So, like, still apparently like the high pressure situations. But working in nonprofit, creating a work. I only had landed on teaching in free fall, and ended up shifting to learning in free fall because I was like, I may have been teaching, but I was sure as heck doing a lot more learning along the way. And so the learning in free fall is a nod to that learning journey that took place. That I tried to do some teaching along the way, but the free fall being like I was grasping at anything that I could to try to find my feet.
Can you talk a little bit about the cover? Because I love this cover.
So along the way, I'll give you a little context. During COVID, I was missing, like, the meeting people on the train randomly type thing. And somebody, I don't remember who, gave me, there's this platform called Lunch Club. And it literally was leveraging AI, like, way towards the beginning, to match you with people that thought it would benefit you to connect with, and you could kind of guide it a little bit, like, hey, I tried to guide it to, like, I want to meet publishers, I want to meet agents, and then, like, there are times that, like, oh, clearly you wanted to meet a fundraiser, and so, like, there was definitely some give and take in that process, but I met an agent on that platform who said, if I ever, like there's not a whole lot of help I can give you, but if I needed to ever do a book cover, this is your guy. And so, like, I kept his name, and his name is Pete Garceau, and he did Atomic Habits as well. So it's not cheap to use him, but I knew from the very beginning that he was the guy that I wanted to use. And he put together that, and he put together some really good ones. And I thought, particularly, like, the free fall with, like, the pieces and the background of the Iowa, and he did an incredible job. And we all know people 100% judge a book by its cover, and so he was worth every penny.
what would you say is your number one takeaway that you want readers, especially those in education or those in administration or school leadership, to take away from your book?
That's a really great question. I think for honestly, for the policy is the really tough part, and we need to have a collective voice here, to use our voice to push on our policymakers. We need, similarly, somebody asked me what would be the one thing you would say we should do? And I said we need leadership, and so somebody that in the Department of Education, which open up that worms, but somebody that actually has had their feet on the ground and been in the classroom, who is leading, not the bureaucracy and the, we're a very, I want to say, I don't have the actual data, but the number of administrators over the past 10 years has increased exponentially, and while the number of classroom teachers has largely stayed the same. And that's mind-blowing. And there are so few individuals that are opting in to even go through teaching programs right now, kind of all over the place. But I would say leveraging our voices to push on our legislatures and to put on our legislators and our leadership to make change. And then putting feet more on the ground, volunteering in classrooms, get into the classrooms. You don't have to be a parent in order to do that. I shout out Reading Partners. I've never worked for them, but they're an amazing organization, nonprofit organization. They train you, and you are reading one-on-one with a student weekly, and it's an incredible experience. That short stint in ed tech I did, I set up a relationship with them, is how I know them. And I was like, hey, if we're an ed tech company, we should be in classrooms. And so got clearance for anybody that wanted to go volunteer in classrooms in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, which is a pretty intense community. And it was amazing. And so getting your feet on the ground there, but also using your voice at the leadership level as much as you can. I started calling my legislators this year for the first time, and a lot of times I was talking to a machine, but I actually talk to people as well. And there's scripts that can help you do that too. Thank you guys again for coming. I'm really, really appreciative.
And I think she'll be signing books up here.